So good evening. Are you all excited to be here? I'm excited to be here. I understand we've got, how many of you are new? I understand that there's a bunch of you in the room. It's my first one, first build business. So, all right, here's to our first conference. I'm so excited to be with you. So excited to be with you tonight to talk about Radical Candor, which is a really simple idea. It's actually a really simple idea that if you can put into practice can help you do the best work of your life, but even more important, we believe, build the best relationships of your career. So we're going to talk about that tonight as well as tomorrow at a workshop. And the invitation is to really love your work and the people that you work with. So while I will be here to facilitate and guide, I'm really curious in helping you all start to build some relationships with the people in the room. I know that's one of the jobs for you, is to really start to connect with each other and get to know each other. So what I'd like to do is just give you a couple minutes to turn to the person sitting next to you and start to build relationships. That might be a little out of your comfort zone. If it's someone that you already know, meet someone new. We're already having fun with it. What do you appreciate about your work, and what are some of the challenges? What do you appreciate? What are some of the challenges? Okay. So we'll come back to the room. It's so hard to break this conversation up, but I am aware that one of my challenges is I'm between you and drinks and dinner. So perhaps the invitation is that this is a conversation that you can continue with hopefully someone that you're starting to connect with. And I have done this exercise with thousands of people around the world. And here's some of the things that we tend to hear. We don't have the capacity to go back and forth, so hopefully these are some of the things you started talking about in terms of what we appreciate, which are things like we love to solve problems, and we love to make a difference, and we love to learn, and we love to grow. And some of the challenges might be, oh, I don't know, maybe we don't have enough time or resources, and we're not quite sure of our responsibilities. But the number one thing that we appreciate, I have found, and maybe you found this in your conversations, is the people that we work with. We love the people we work with. They're so engaging and exciting, and we love to grow with them and learn with them and have fun with them. Did you also notice if you got to challenges, it's the people? Why don't they do exactly what I want them to? Why do they think differently from me? This is so frustrating, right? And so it's that blend of people. It's really all about the people. And so that's really when we talk about Radical Candor and how this can really help, is because success at work requires collaboration. We've got to do this together. I can think especially in your industry, in every industry, but we've got to do this together. And this requires the development of real, authentic relationships. And that's really what we're talking about when we talk about Radical Candor. And by the way, I'm curious, how many of you have actually read the book Radical Candor, just to get a sense? Wonderful, great. Anyone have the book under your pillow and just osmosis? Okay, all right, I've tried that. That's why audiobooks are great. You can sort of do both of those. So Radical Candor is going to help your teams create a culture of guidance. And by the way, when we talk about feedback, we like to frame it as guidance. Sometimes feedback can sound a little, I don't know, aggressive or screechy. Guidance is really sort of moving in the direction that we all want to go towards. We all want guidance. We all seek guidance. It can help your teams achieve your as well as their fullest potential. And then it can help us drive results collaboratively. In other words, get stuff done. Maybe a less polite way to say it, but we'll start with get stuff done. And so today we're going to be talking about this idea of guidance. And why this is so important on our teams is because this is how we keep our teams together, engaged. If one of your challenges is finding and keeping people, this is how we do it, through honest feedback and what we might call kind and clear feedback. And so to help you understand what we mean by radical candor, I would like to share with you about a time when I received radical candor from Steve. Now, Steve had been a boss of mine and had become a good friend and a mentor to me, and it was a time in my life I like to call the country song part of my life. I don't know, we don't have our music here, but you can imagine, in the span of 2 months, my 6-year-old cat, Bam Bam, out of the blue, got cancer and passed away. My job, I had just gotten an amazing performance review. That got eliminated out of the blue. My relationship ended. I had to move out of the house. And I was in a fire. And at the time, I had long hair, and my forehead and hair was burned, my whole face. And it was really traumatic. I'm fine, and it was okay. But it was a very, very challenging time, and really all I had left was my pickup truck. I live in Los Angeles. It was an SUV, but it's a country song. We just got a creative license there. We're all storytellers in the room, right? So it was a really rough time, and I needed to get a job. And so Steve reached out to me, and he told me about a great opportunity. And I was so excited. I had an interview on a Monday. There was just one problem. As a result of the fire, I was too afraid to go to the salon. It was kind of a PTSD sort of a thing. And so my hair was a disaster. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? Well, my best friend said, don't worry, I can dye your hair. She had done this before once or twice. It had worked fine. This time, I looked in the mirror, and it was a little something like this, which is great for a book cover, not for my coloring. And so I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? She said, don't worry about it. There's this spray. You can get at a drugstore. It's like, oh my gosh, who knew? So she sprayed my hair over the weekend for a wedding, and it looked great. So I was like, I'll do the exact same thing on Monday morning for the interviews. Not a problem. Now, sometimes you travel. Anyone ever stayed in those hotels where the bathroom, it's like small and there's a fan at the same time as the light, and you're kind of rushing, and so I'm sort of spraying, and it wasn't quite as easy as when someone else had done it for me, but I was like, not a problem. I'll go outside, and somehow the natural light will enable me to see what's happening better, but I couldn't really see it, so I was like, I'm sure it's fine. Anyhow, I go to the interviews. I was amazing, right? It was great. And so I go to dinner that night with Steve, and I basically said, when do I start? And he said, well, things take a little time to kind of push through the system, which was not what I was expecting, because I, as I said, was amazing in the interviews. And he looked at me, and then he said, I've got to be clear with you. There were concerns about your professionalism. Now, I'm a pretty sensitive person, and I'm also a perfectionist. Any of my recovering perfectionists in the room here? And so at this point, I'm starting to look for any hole that I could start. There was a pit in my stomach. And then he said, they said you looked disheveled. Now, I was so horrified, but I was also curious, because this was never a word I had heard out loud. By the way, this is what the word looks like. Because I had never actually heard anyone pronounce it, and I was like, oh my God, that's me, disheveled. So I'm sort of looking for an even bigger hole. I'm so embarrassed. And then he looked at me, and he knows as sensitive as I am, I also have a sense of humor, and he said, you kind of looked like a tiger. There were all of these orange and black stripes on the back of your jacket and on the back of your hair, and I was like, oh my God. And as embarrassed as I was, the way he said it was like, you're not a terrible person. You made a mistake. And it's something you can fix. And by the way, I did fix it. I was able to go to the salon, get over my fear, and I actually did get the job. And so when we look at what Steve was able to do, he cared about me personally. He knew that I was sensitive, but he knew most of all what I wanted, what I needed was that job. And so he didn't get in the way, his caring for me, he didn't let that get in the way of him challenging me directly. This was literally a blind spot. There is no way I could have known or corrected it had he not told me. So radical candor, care personally, challenge directly. Pretty simple. Now, if it were only so simple, I would just leave now and we could all sort of go on with our days or our evening. But it's not quite so simple. And so something that Kim Scott, who she and I went to business school together, what she did, which I thought was so brilliant, was she helped understand all the obstacles that get in the way of radical candor and what it really means. Now, by the way, you'll see two axes here. Up there, care personally, challenge directly. If you did not go to business school, basically all you learn is all of the world's problems, just throw them up in a 2x2 matrix like that. That's all you need to know. Care personally, challenge directly. Do it with any problem. It's the quickest way to success. So care personally, challenge directly. This is the framework for radical candor. Let's start to unpack what we mean by each of these dimensions. First of all, the care personally dimension. In other words, give a damn. And this is about caring about people enough to build more than just professional relationships, actually real human relationships, really authentic human relationships. We need to be more than just professional. Now, what is it about being professional that's such a challenge? Well, what happens when we are just professional is that it can lead to apathy. Right? We start to not care so much about the people that we work with. We start to not see them maybe as smart as we are. And the worst part of humanity, and this isn't necessarily office politics, this is part of the part of our brain that puts people into friend or foe, very tribal. You're with me, you're against me. This is actually a term from sociology, pseudospeciation. You don't need to say it, and you certainly don't need to say it over drinks. But this is the part of our brain that's labeling people all the time. Are you with me, or are you against me? I'm from Boston originally. Red Sox fans, Yankees fans. Marketing, oh, you should see the salespeople. And by the way, the business development or salespeople, you should see what they say about the marketing people. Right? We do this all the time. It's how we're wired. So at the very least, we want to give a damn about the people that we work with. And so part of what's hard is that when we're about 18 years old, we're told, like, you got to be professional. And what that means is that we often leave the best parts of ourselves at home, the parts that make us really who we are. And so at the very least, we want to step out of that to give a damn, show some human respect and decency for the people we work with. But if we are really lucky, if we're really lucky, we can love the people we work with. Now, I'm not talking about sort of the office holiday party gone horribly wrong. I'm not talking about that kind of love, so if I have any HR people in the room, just to be assured, I'm talking about the kind of love that sounds like this, and I'm going to read this. Love is that condition in the human spirit that is so profound, it empowers us to develop courage, to trust that courage, and to build bridges with it, and to trust those bridges and cross over them so that we can attempt to reach each other. From the poet Maya Angelou, so beautiful, building these bridges. And I was really struck by this idea of your conference of building business and building yourself and all of the things that we're wanting to build. And so I'm going to really encourage you, to have the courage to build bridges, the courage to build these kinds of bridges with the people that we work with. Now, I will say that radical candor starts with you. And so if we're going to care personally, we have to first care personally for ourselves. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche for a reason. We have to put the oxygen mask on ourselves first. And in my radical candor journey, the greatest teacher I had of how to care about myself and how to take care of myself is this guy, Grizz. Grizz, Newfoundland Labrador mix. Any dog people in the room? We got some dog people, great. And so Grizz was my greatest teacher. He passed away 2 years ago from cancer, but he taught me everything I needed to know about love, unconditional love, about caring, and about doing the things that you need to do to take care of yourself and to fill yourself up at work. So Grizz taught me everything I need to know. Now, there is just one challenge with the Radical Candor framework, which is this challenge directly. Alas, love is not all that you need. There's this other dimension. This is the willing to piss people off category, right? And so I had another really great teacher for this category. And her name was Bam Bam. She's challenging me right now. There she is. Bam Bam, you heard about her. Now, in her brief time on the planet, she taught me many lessons. We ultimately did learn to love each other, but she had no problem speaking truth to power, and she was very clear in her challenges, and I have the scars and scratches to show you. So I learned so much from Bam Bam. And I will say that how many of us have learned this message, not when we were 18 years old, but 18 months old: if you don't have anything nice to say, don't say anything at all. Right? I know I got this message, and so we think about, why is challenge directly hard for us? Because we got this message, which was a lovely message, but not so helpful at work, because congratulations, now it's our job to say these not very nice things, right? And by the way, we believe that if you are a manager, you have people reporting to you, you're running a team, it's not just your job, it's actually your moral obligation, because there is no way that the people working for you are going to know what to do more of, which is praise, or what to do less of, unless we tell them. We have blind spots. I literally had a blind spot with my hairspray. So that's why we feel so strongly that it's not just your job, it's your moral obligation. Now, to help you understand a little bit more about this framework and why it can be hard, what I'd like to do is illuminate what happens when we fail in one dimension or another. Now, if we are challenging without caring, we call this obnoxious aggression. Now, I know what's happening in your head right now. You're starting to think about the people you work with, and you might be putting names in boxes. Even though I can't see, I know that's what's happening. I want to say this is not a personality test. In fact, Kim was originally going to call this the asshole quadrant. And she didn't. First of all, it's not a very nice word. But also because these are behaviors. I know that I am not a jerk, but I know I sure have acted like a jerk sometimes. I do it more than I'd like, for sure. And I know that each of us in the audience has done that as well. So obnoxious aggression, this is when we challenge without caring. Challenge without caring, obnoxious aggression. Now, the really interesting thing, and just because I don't want you to leave this thinking that you can just say to someone, in the spirit of radical candor, you're an idiot. No, that is still obnoxious aggression. You don't get like a get out of, jerk free card by saying in the spirit of radical candor. Still obnoxious aggression, we have to care. Now, there's this manipulative insincerity, which is when we neither care nor challenge. Now, this is fabulous for sitcoms and for TV dramas, where it's like you say to someone's face, oh, you're fabulous, and then you turn to the side and say, what a train wreck. Again, it's great for TV. It's a very toxic place at work. This is passive-aggressive behavior, two-faced behavior, very, very toxic. But the vast majority of mistakes that we make are up in ruinous empathy. I know it's the vast majority of mistakes that I make, and it's certainly what we see in organizations where we care so much, we care so much, and we care so much. We don't want to hurt the person's feelings. And then 6 months later, we have to fire them because we didn't have the courage to tell them what they needed to know. Ruinous empathy. Certainly why I'm so passionate about doing this work. So what I want to do now is help you understand where radical candor came from and share with you in Kim Scott's own words.
The origin story of radical candor happened in the space of time it took a light to change. I was living in Manhattan at the time, and I had this golden retriever puppy named Belvedere, and I adored this dog, and she was totally untrained. So I'm taking her for a walk one evening, and she jumps in front of an oncoming cab. I pull her out of the way just in time, and I'm sort of standing there with my heart in my throat on the street of Manhattan. And this man looks at me and he says, I can see you really love that dog. That was all he has to do to move up on the care personally axis. He didn't have to take me to lunch. He didn't even have to know my name. I can see you really love that dog. But, he says, you're gonna kill that dog if you don't teach it to sit. That was a direct challenge. And then he points at the ground and he says, sit. The dog sat. I had no idea she even knew what that meant. And he looks at me and he says, it's not mean, it's clear. And then the light changes and he walks off and leaves me with words to live by.
Now, we're not suggesting that we treat our team members like dogs. However, what we are suggesting is that there can be a real kindness in clarity. We like to say that radical candor is kind and clear, kind and clear. And so what I want to do now is just revisit very quickly the quadrants and bringing in some of our animal friends here. Now, it's a pretty clear challenge, but the relationship is destroyed along the way. Building a house of cards, right? Obnoxious aggression, challenging without caring, challenging without caring. Manipulative insincerity, this is when we neither care nor challenge. Great work, keep it up, great job. I understand there's a vet conference, I think, nearby, so they might enjoy that. And then there's our friends in ruinous empathy. You know, we're just so proud of you. You did such a great job, but we don't tell you what you actually really need to know. And then I've got my own version of radical candor, which I also like to say was a Christmas miracle, because there's Bam Bam and there's Grizz. The fact that Santa made it through this with Bam Bam was a miracle. This was the fact that she sat there, it was amazing. So it is possible. We can be kind and clear. We can have caring and challenging. We can have cats and dogs living together. That is the invitation with radical candor. And so I want you just to sort of quickly in your head to sort of imagine a scenario where a colleague is going to a presentation and she just had lunch and all of a sudden there's this huge chunk of spinach in her teeth, right? That's a scenario sort of easy to imagine. And we won't have time to do it, so I'll kind of just walk you through some examples. But in your own head, start to think about the different quadrants and how you might actually respond in the quadrants. So an obnoxious aggression scenario for this person might be something like, hey, Popeye, you really love that spinach. You're saving some for later. That's awesome. That's really great. And by the way, doing it in front of other people, really humiliating them. Now, the thing about obnoxious aggression is the person now knows what the problem is, but you've damaged the relationship. Manipulative insincerity, now I will do this exercise in workshops, and people can be very creative. It's kind of amazing. So this one, someone came up with one which I thought was so funny. They were like, oh my gosh, you look so amazing. Here, let's take a selfie. I'll put it on social media. Like, oh, make sure you smile, right? And so it's sort of this idea of you're saying one thing to their face and then you're being kind of not very nice behind their back. And then ruinous empathy could be something like where you just don't say anything and you say, you know, earnestly like, I know you'll do a great job at the presentation, right? But you don't want to hurt their feelings and they'll figure it out, whatever. Meanwhile, they now go to 6 client meetings with spinach in their teeth. Not so nice after all, right? I mean, how many of us would like to have us told if we had spinach in our teeth before a meeting? We all would, and yet how often do we not do it because of these different fears? So I actually had a radical candor example like this happen myself. I was leading a workshop, and I get very excited with writing the marker, and there was a group exercise, so everyone was off to the side, and this woman pulled me over to the side, and she said, you know, the workshop's going great, I'm getting so much out of it. I did just want to let you know, you have blue marker all over your chin. I know I would want to know. And then she had a mirror, and she's like, see, it's just right here. And I was able to fix it. It was amazing. The mirror's like an extra touch. You don't have to like solve the problem for the person. But do you think I wanted to go through the workshop? But so by the way, if I have marker on my chin, someone come let me know. You know, but we want to know these things, but we're often afraid to tell the people what they really need to know. So we sort of have this fear that it's going to land as obnoxious aggression, but what people really need from us is this kindness and clarity, this radical candor. So what I want to do is explain the order of operations for radical candor. Now, I think there's this theme of like flipping the script, and often what happens is, how many of you, when you think about feedback or guidance, we go right to giving feedback? How can I give feedback better? I think most of us do. Maybe not all of us, but many of us do. Well, in fact, in our model, we actually first start by soliciting feedback, by getting it. And especially if we're a manager or a leader and we have direct reports, we have to sort of lay down the power and show that we can take it before we start dishing it out. So we start by giving it. And then we give, by getting it, excuse me. And then we give the feedback. And by the way, we give more praise than criticism. We'll talk about that in a moment. So we start by getting it, then we give it, then we gauge it. And this is potentially a strange looking word for non-English speakers, but this is basically just we measure it. How is it landing? How is it landing? And then finally we encourage it. And so I'll go into each of these in just a little bit more detail, but why is this so important? It's so interesting. The more you ask for feedback, the more people perceive you to be as more effective and as a better leader. And interestingly, the more you listen, the better employees think you are at giving feedback. And so we actually spend a good bit of time in our workshops practicing listening. Listening is actually the bedrock of feedback. It's actually the bedrock of feedback. So let me explain to you a little bit about how you might solicit feedback and why this is hard for us. How many of us know that we have what's called a negativity bias? This is from Rick Hansen out of UC Berkeley, but I love this idea. Our brains are like Velcro for the negative and Teflon for the positive. Think about it. You have a performance review. 95 things are positive, 5 of them not so positive. What are you going to go home at night and spin about? Those 5 negative ones, right? So we have to correct for this negativity bias. We also have a threat response, this what's called an amygdala hijack. We are wired to go towards rewards and away from threat, this kind of fight, flight, freeze situation. And that's what can get triggered for us when it comes to getting feedback. I know that's certainly been a muscle I have had to flex, and I think for many people, we have to shift into more of a growth mindset. So we have to navigate through our negativity bias, our amygdala hijack. And so just to give you a model, whether you have one-to-ones or not, we definitely encourage you, if you have direct reports, to have one-to-ones. Have a go-to question. And I will explain to you in a moment what I mean by go-to question, but basically at a high level, this is a question that you're going to use to solicit feedback. I'm embracing the discomfort. Even just a few seconds, there's a few seconds there where we get uncomfortable. Use the silence. If you ask a question, they're going to be uncomfortable. You need to use the silence so you can actually get the feedback that you need to keep growing. Our orientation is to listen with the intent to understand, not to respond. In other words, to get curious, not furious. We're going to feel some feelings, especially if it's challenging feedback, but beware of this idea of this amygdala hijack where all of a sudden we sort of blow our top and we turn into the Incredible Hulk. Breathe. It's simple, but it actually can help us calm down the response that we're having. And then reward the candor. And this is so important. It's actually pretty rare that we get this sort of feedback. We consider radical candor a gift. And if somebody gives you the gift of their feedback, we want to make sure that we reward it. Now, let's say there are 4 out of 5 things you agree with and you can change, great, go ahead and change them. If there's something you don't agree with, that's okay. Just follow up and say, I heard you say this. Here's how I see it. What do you think? Have a conversation. But if you don't respond, how likely is it that you're going to get this again? Probably not very likely. Probably not very likely. So here's a few examples of some possible go-to questions. Again, the point of these questions is to solicit feedback from your team to see how you can improve. And wherever you are in the organization, whether it's especially as a manager, but even amongst peers as individual contributors, what's something I did in the last week that made it difficult to work with me? Using that time-bound nature can be very helpful to get something specific. And you're going to have to, again, sort of sit and wait to hear what they might say. What could I have done differently to make your job easier? Or, working on this project, how could I have helped you more on this project? This one goes out to all the micromanagers and absentee managers. Where did I get involved that you wish I hadn't? Where did I avoid getting involved that you wish I had? So again, we might think we're being a thought partner, but someone else might take this as you're sort of all up in my business, or, oh, I actually need more from you. And then finally, here's what I tried to accomplish last week. How could I have done it better? And again, these are just some examples. The point is that you want questions that are going to actually get you feedback that you want and need to grow. Another one I like is like the one about what's a blind spot of mine that you've noticed, or what could be better on the team. The point is areas for you to improve. Now, moving into offering feedback. And we're sort of blowing through quickly some ideas. We'll have some more time to follow up for questions. Tomorrow I've got a workshop at 10:30. Why is this hard? Why is it hard to offer feedback? Well, This is a model of the brain from a neuroscientist, David Rock. I don't know if any of you have heard of it. It's called SCARF. But I think it's really helpful because it shows what's happening in the brains of the people that we work with. First of all, status. If you are a boss and you are giving negative feedback or critical feedback to the person that reports to you, you are already putting them in a state of threat. We are wired to look hierarchically, and the very act that you're in a hierarchical different position, it's going to be perceived as a threat. That's why it's so important to start first by soliciting criticism, depending where you are. So status. Certainty, we like to know outcome. If you're going to invest in a big piece of equipment or start a big construction project, you'd kind of like to know it's going to work out. We like certainty. This is why clarity, being clear, is so important. Autonomy, we want to have control over our own destiny. This is why micromanaging can be so challenging for people, because it feels like they're not giving us a sense to do our own work. And then the final two are really about these relationships that we're building, relatedness. Am I in this in-group or out-group? Am I at the meetings that I need to be in? Am I feeling left out or not? And then finally, fairness. Yes, just like dogs, humans are just like dogs. If you have more than one dog and one dog gets a treat and the other dog doesn't get a treat, you are in big trouble. And humans are just like that. Why did the sales team get that big budget and we didn't? Why did they just get that new hire and we didn't? We are constantly looking around and measuring for fairness. So I think this is a really, really helpful framework. So when we are giving feedback, and by the way, this is both praise and criticism, these can be very brief talks. Now, the purpose of praise is to show people what to do more of. The purpose of criticism is to move in a different direction. Think about these as 1 to 2 minute impromptu talks. One way that I like to do this is, let's say we're going into a meeting and you've got a team member who says, I really want to work on my presentation skills with the client and how I respond to questions. You have the meeting, and then after the meeting you can say, here's what worked really well with the client, you responded this way, here's where you could have improved. So just these quick sort of observations. It doesn't have to be an hour-long therapy session. Number 1, be humble. Kim was very intentional in calling the book Radical Candor and not truth. All we know is here's how I see it from my perspective. How do you see it? There's a big difference when you say to someone, I think that's wrong versus that's wrong. So really important to be humble. This is how I see it. You state it as your opinion. You support it with rationale, being very specific about what you've observed. Questions are your best friend. Really being curious. We're really trying to get to a better outcome. So being humble, being helpful. This feedback is in service of this person's growth. Sometimes it's about things that we feel like we just got to get off our chest, which are really more about us. And so a really good litmus test before we give feedback about someone's growth or development, is this helpful for them? And can I offer it in a way that's being helpful? So you can even state, my intention is to be helpful. The whole point of this is not sort of a Hunger Games death match. The point is, how can we collaborate? How can we actually grow? How can we grow together? And if there is emotion, this is your chance to build a relationship and to meet the emotion with compassion. So humble, helpful. We have a little acronym, HIP. So we've got the H's. We want to do it immediately. Now this one can be tough because we think, oh, we're geographically dispersed, or oh, they'll figure it out, or oh, I don't have the facts all right. But the point is, if it's something they need to fix right then this is the time to do it, because you might lose the context, you might lose the details, and all of a sudden you'll say, remember 6 months ago in that meeting when you crossed your arms? And you're like, I have no idea what you're talking about, right? Meanwhile, you're just resenting them more and more and just seeing them as a big arm crosser, just kind of, right? So we need to do it immediately. You want to do it in person. So much of human exchange is nonverbal. If you can't do it in person, next best is a video conference or then a phone call. We don't want to break up by text or Slack, right? So in person. And if you're criticizing someone, this is different than disagreeing with an idea. This is criticism. We need to do it in private. And again, we've got to meet that threat, that potential threat response. Now, we like to say to praise in public. There's a little caveat here with this, is that some people don't like to be praised in public, but the point of praise is to show what good looks like. You can think about praise as an accelerator to do more of the good stuff, and criticism is like a brake. And so part of praise is to show everyone, here's what good looks like at our team. Now, if somebody doesn't want that, you can be respectful of that, but just orienting towards this idea of public praise and knowing the details, not like, John's team did a great job on the website rollout, thanks, John. And then the team is like, they don't know what, do your homework on praise as much as criticism. And then finally, it's not about personality. These are about things that we can change. Just like you don't want to say, you're an idiot. You also don't want to say, you're a genius. These are about specific things that we can change. So a model that we like to use at Radical Candor, and some of you might know this, is situation, behavior, impact, which is from the Center for Creative Leadership. And so the way this works is you identify what the situation is, being very specific about the context. So for example, in this week's meeting with our sales team, and then you can describe what was said and done, just the very specifics of what you observed or the actual work product. So for this meeting with the sales team, you had put all the numbers together and the handouts were well received and you answered the questions from the team spot on. For example, this is praise. And then the impact, what is the biggest consequence? There's a lot of trust in our team now because you were able to answer the questions and we had a really productive meeting. Thank you. The flip side could be, we had our annual meeting with the CEO. There were a couple of slides that had inaccuracies and you answered a couple of the questions incorrectly, and now the CEO doesn't trust our team. I'm concerned that our reputation suffered. Situation, behavior, impact. The specificity is really important. You can think about that Radical Candor is kind and clear, specific and sincere. The specificity will really help you. Now, an idea that I want to orient you towards is that Radical Candor is measured not at the speaker's mouth, but at the listener's ear. At the listener's ear. We might think we're being really kind and clear, and the other person has no idea what we're talking about. They think we're being obnoxious, or maybe they think it's ruinous empathy. We don't know. We have to find out, how did it land for this other person? So this is all about gauging how the feedback landed. So we've got this 2x2 matrix. If you have the book or it's on the website, use that as a guide. My intention was to be kind and clear, to land here in Radical Candor. Where did it land for you? Part of what we do with teams is that we roll it out and there's a shared vocabulary. Whether you use the exact terms or not is up to you, but the point is to sort of orient towards how did it land for you? Measuring not at my mouth, but at the listener's ear. Now, choose the right vector. What does this mean? Let's say you're having a conversation with someone. The point of gauging is that you might have all your notes together and then all of a sudden there's another live human being with their own understanding of what happened, right? So we typically want to kind of go up on the care to start, not out on the challenge. Especially if this is a new relationship, we really have to have them understand that it's coming from a place of being helpful. It's always easier to go back towards the challenge, but if you go right in the challenge, people might be defensive. Does that make sense? So you really want to develop that relationship. Now, unfortunately, when we hold up on so much feedback, sometimes all we can think about is going right to the challenge. So think about establishing that relationship, and as you saw in the video, it doesn't need to take that much time. So this is somebody getting sad, so there's some emotion there, and this can happen. Now, I have to say, when I ask sort of what are people's questions about feedback or Radical Candor, I'll always get the question, well, how do you do it so that people don't get upset? Sorry. If I had emotional Novocaine to sell you, I wouldn't be here. I would be on like a tropical island somewhere, right? But we don't. We have emotions, and there will be emotions. This is our chance to build the relationship. So if somebody gets sad, then you move up on the care. But often what happens when somebody gets sad is we move back. Oh, did I say you needed to do that? Don't worry about it. I will stay up all night. I'll take care of it. No, you're busy. You've got so much going on. It's fine, right? We sort of do that because we don't want to hurt the other person's feelings. Or sometimes we overdo it on the challenge. So this is actually the same thing. If this is not someone throwing up, this is someone getting very angry. If someone gets angry, it's actually the same thing. We move up on the care. We acknowledge the emotion, but often when someone is giving us some emotion, some anger, we go right into the, we challenge them back, or sometimes what happens is we're just sort of throw up our hands and say, oh, I can't do anything with this person, and we move into manipulative insincerity. So with both of these, whether there's sadness or anger, we actually move up on the care. Now, I'll give you a few sort of phrases that you might consider using. These are not a Bible. Again, it's going to really depend on your relationship, but the point is just to orient you towards acknowledging the emotion. I'm noticing there's some strong emotion. What's coming up for you? Again, this is where you build the relationship by meeting emotion with compassion. I want it to be helpful. Looks like I've missed the mark. How can I get the conversation back on track? Ooh. How can I help? I have found there's nothing more powerful than these 4 simple words and really meaning it. How can I help? In this moment, what would be most helpful? What can I do to get our conversation back on track? Again, these are not sort of perfect words, but the point is that you really want to acknowledge the emotion. One tip is that sometimes when people are very angry, they can actually start crying. And so if somebody is angry and crying and you say, you look so sad, that can really throw them off too. So all you can do is just notice that there's emotion, right? And that's how we start to build the relationship. Now, this doesn't mean that you don't go into the challenge. They're just not going to be receptive to it. So maybe you come back in 15 minutes, maybe you come back the next morning, but you still want to have the conversation. We're not big fans of rules, but if there was one rule, it would be don't take it personally. The challenge with saying don't take it personally, and so many of us do this, is that it kind of invalidates the experience that the other person is having, right? Oh, don't take it personally. Well, of course they're going to take it personally. Don't we want them to take their work personally? They just worked 6 months on this project. They've invested so much of themselves into this project. So I really encourage you to think about how this might land and to not use that as a phrase. Now, this is someone wearing headphones, not listening. For those of you that either read Kim's book or have seen her talk, I'll just share with you quickly Kim's story, if you don't know it, which is that she at the time was working at Google, and her boss was Sheryl Sandberg, and Kim was running AdSense, and she had this meeting with the founders and the CEO of Google at the time, and AdSense was blowing up. It was doing amazing. And so the founders and the CEO were like, how much money can we give you? What sort of resources do we need? How can we help? How can we help? So Kim was like, I just aced that meeting. That was amazing. And Sheryl takes her back and says a couple of things that went really well in the meeting. And then she said, you said a lot. And Kim's like, oh, yeah, it's kind of a verbal tick. It's not a big deal. It's not a problem. And Sheryl's like, Google will get you a speech coach. And Kim's like, speech coach? I don't need a speech coach. I've got a business to run. I'm really busy. And then finally, Sheryl said, when you do this gesture, I can see that you're not listening to what I'm saying. Let me be more clear with you. When you say every third word, it makes you sound stupid. And all of a sudden, Kim was like, oh my gosh, now she has her attention. Now, when Kim shares this story, this was radical candor for Kim because of the relationship that she had with Sheryl and because Kim was not listening to Sheryl. I am very different than Kim. All Sheryl would have had to say with me was like, you said I'm a lot. I'm like, oh my gosh, what can I do? How could, And so part of what we're showing is that different people are going to have different reactions. So when someone is not hearing the challenge, then this is when you actually have to move farther out on the challenge. Often, though, what happens is we sort of back off and we say, oh, they're not going to listen, and we sort of get bulldozed over, or we move into manipulative insincerity. So if someone isn't hearing you, that's when you actually have to move further out on the challenge to make sure that you're being heard. And we don't know necessarily why they're not hearing us. Maybe it's hard for them. Maybe they're not listening. We really don't know. So all we can do are, again, these are just some potential guidelines. Want to make sure we're on the same page. What are you hearing in this conversation? This could also be like, I feel like I'm struggling to get my point across. Would it be helpful for me to be more direct? That's another way in. You can even just acknowledge what's going on for you. I don't feel like I'm being heard, or this this is the proverbial frying pan ready to come out. I can see I need to be more direct with you. So again, all of this, you need to put it into your own words, but these are the ideas if someone is not really hearing what you're saying. And then finally, encouraging radical candor. And this is really where we can all kind of take our own part. Wherever we are in the organization, this whole idea that radical candor starts with us. And so this is where your real leverage is. You're going to model it. When you see it, praise it. When you actually get that feedback from your go-to question, that you do what you can to reward the candor. We'll talk more about this tomorrow. Require clean escalation. I'll get into this in just a moment. Practice and be patient. You know, this one is tough. This has been a life's work for me. Part of why I teach and I speak is I have found there is no better way to learn something than to teach it. I don't know how many of you in the room feel the same way, but when you have to actually sort of practice it, it forces you. And part of developing a culture of radical candor means it just becomes something that you do every day. In fact, we had a marketing event, speaking of marketing, and this is dental floss. It says Radical Candor on it. And part of why we created this dental floss was, first of all, for the spinach in your teeth exercise. So now we've got that. But we want this to become a practice so that it's not like a root canal and, oh my gosh, I've got all this feedback I'm sitting on, but it just becomes something that we do, part of our culture. So I'm going to encourage you to practice it, know that you're going to mess up, that's okay, and having that shared language. We'll talk more about that tomorrow. Now, when I say clean escalation, what do we mean? This is this idea, someone comes to me with feedback that's really about someone else, but they're coming to me, especially if I'm their manager. This is the one time where we don't want to actually do our listening, because at this point, we're just stirring the pot. If Andy comes to me and about Bob, and Bob comes to me about Andy, this is when I say as the manager, Andy, what did Bob say when you told him that? And Bob, what did Andy say when you told him that? We want them to work with each other together, and if not, insist that they try. This one is really tough, but again, this is how we start to get into manipulative insincerity if we don't sort of nip this in the bud. This is where we want to be as fair and as fast as possible. So this whole idea of clean escalation, there's some more tips on this in the book. This is actually, I think, probably, if not the hardest job as a manager, one of the hardest jobs, because what we realize is that when someone's coming to us, we're only seeing part of the story, and the other part of the story needs to be filled in. Now, if it happens to be two different managers, then have all four of you in the room together. And then finally, practice. You know, everything requires practice, and this is no different. We're going to start off. This isn't something that we were taught. I'm going to encourage you to share what you're trying. Certainly, come by tomorrow. We'll do some more practice. Give yourself permission to make mistakes. I know we don't like to make mistakes, but that's the only way that we're going to get better at this. And then being a humble beginner. One of my favorite phrases that I sort of orient myself with is this idea of beginner's mind. There's a famous Zen Buddhist quote, and it says, "In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities, but in the expert's mind, there are few." Beginner's mind, many possibilities. Expert's mind, there are few. And by the time we get to where we are in your careers, we start to narrow down the vision. Oh yeah, we tried that CRM implementation years ago. It didn't work. We do that with people too. Oh, here comes Sally. I know what she's going to be talking about, right? And so how can we stay open, this sort of get curious, not furious? We can't hold curiosity and judgment at the same time. Starting first with ourselves. This whole idea that radical candor starts with you. And so I really want to just cement as you go on for the next few days in this conference that you have, this idea of radical candor starting with you. And I really want you to think about becoming a bridge builder, bridging that caring personally and challenge directly, being kind and clear, knowing that we need both of them in order to really build the kind of businesses that we want to have, but even more important, to build the relationships that we have. So since we're all in the business of building those bridges and the courage that it takes to be a bridge builder. And so if there's one last thought I will leave you with, it's this idea of building the bridge between caring personally and challenging directly. And with that, I will just encourage you. There's many ways you can share the ideas. This is my new cat, ZG there. She looks just like Bam Bam. She's a voracious reader of Radical Candor there. But we've got the book. The podcast is currently on hiatus, but there's a lot of great content on the website. Use the 2x2 grid framework as a way to guide your conversations, to a better place. And I'll close with one kind of final update about the book, which is that originally, we were thinking about the title Radical Candor and this whole idea of candor versus truth, because truth sort of seems all-knowing, right? Whereas candor is like, here's how I see it, how do you see it? What's really interesting is that there's a new publication of the book coming out this fall, and we have a foreword and an afterword. And what we realized was that when we talk about radical candor, the idea is really actually compassionate candor. The compassion is the care personally, the candor is the challenge directly. What makes it radical is that it's so rare and so important. And so with that, I really encourage you to think about it as compassionate candor, caring personally and challenging directly. And I will look forward to seeing, hopefully, many of you tomorrow morning. So thank you so much.